For those of you who don't know me or haven't met me yet, I'm Peter Miller, the Andrew High School Arts Director at the Academy, and tonight it's my great pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Nicole Miller, the recipient of the Chuck Close, Gilmore D. Clark, Michael I. Rapuano, John Armstrong, Cheloner Rome Prize in the Visual Arts. It's right up there with the longest Rome Prize title. Originally from Tucson, Nicole currently lives and works in Los Angeles. She has a BFA from the California Institute of the Arts in Valencia, California, and an MFA from the Roski School of Arts at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Recent solo exhibitions are too numerous to mention, but a couple I will mention. The Borrowers at Koenig and Clinton in New York, Death of a School, shown both at the Marfa Ballroom in Marfa, Texas, and at the Centre d'Art Contemporain in Geneva, and Believing is Seeing at LACMA, also in Los Angeles. And in addition to these solo shows, again, only a couple I've mentioned, Nicole has also been invited to participate in numerous group exhibitions, including portraits and other likenesses at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, Artist Film International at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and 4 at the Studio Museum in Harlem, to name only a few. Her work is also included in the permanent collections of several institutions, including the Hammer Museum, LACMA, SF MoMA, and the Museum in Harlem, and the Houston Museum of African American Culture. In her films and installations, Nicole explores the transformative capabilities of the moving image to reconstruct interpretations of self and in culture. Her videos focus on the interplay and also the disjunctions between preconception and reality, especially and most pressingly with regard to African American identity. In her hands, film is a powerful storytelling tool employed to subvert stereotypes and reclaim lost histories and identities. Her Death of a School confronted the shutdown of a school, a victim of anti-immigration ideology and political bullying, a school to which her mother, a teacher, had dedicated her entire career. On the High Line in New York, some of you might have seen her 7-minute video work, The Conductor, a work which lends its title to Nicole's talk this evening. First shown at Laxart in Los Angeles in 2009, The Conductor was projected for several months against the side of a building on the High Line at West 22nd Street, showing a young African-American man against a non-specific or site-neutral gold background, his face contorted in a series of expressions ranging from bliss to concern. The title and the man's occupation, that of a conductor of an orchestra, undermines the viewer's initial assumptions, hewing to predictable preconceptions about African-American men, that the subject must be disturbed, high, or unhinged, or all of the above. Her 2-channel Daggering from 2012, shown at the Studio Museum in Harlem at the end of 2012 and the beginning of 2013, juxtaposes footages of the artist dancing ballet on the one hand and that of Caribbean dancehall daggering, a bawdy and raucous dance craze. According to one critic, it was an extended pas de deux that conjures up the tensions of female young adulthood. While in Rome, Nicole is at work on a new project, a counterpart to a community-based video that she has developed over the past several years in Los Angeles, focused on the youth from a neighborhood in South Central, a neighborhood adjacent to Inglewood. Nicole's project is written by her young collaborators and then filmed by her in collaboration with them. Her format, which is her trademark, allows for self-representation within a cycle of viewing, editing, and creating. So we'll hear more about that process this evening. Please join me in welcoming Nicole to the podium.
Thank you. So nice to see all my new friends in the audience. So yes, I make videos. It's all video. And so we're going to be watching some things on the computer today. I'm going to start out by showing the video, The Conductor. And The Conductor is the first video that I ever made. When I went into graduate school, I had applied with all photographic work. I had studied with Alan Sekula at CalArts and was only pretty much a documentary photographer at the time. And then, I'd always been in love and obsessed with cinema. And I thought maybe I should just try making a moving image, and this was basically my first attempt, and it's called The Conductor. And basically, it became a very foundational work for me. I wanted to make a work that sort of represented my idea of what the importance of representation was in my life as a maker and a viewer. And I had been thinking about the idea of a conductor as a sort of metaphor for this idea, or an example of it even. And I liked thinking about the way that a conductor is a performer of a score, and an audience sits in front of a conductor. The audience is the orchestra. And the orchestra receives his performance and turns it into something. They turn it into music. And so there's this moment between the performance and the reception, this sort of transmission where it's about to become something new. And I like thinking about images in this way. And whenever I start a new project or think about a new idea, I always try to think about how, in its transmission, there's a possibility for it to manifest itself as something new by the audience. And so this video, The Conductor, is silent because it represents this moment right before its reception. We'll only watch a couple of minutes of it. And so this is an actor named Eric Ruff that I had auditioned for this project. And basically I asked him to study videos of conductors and to memorize 10 minutes of facial movement. We called it a facial ballet. And he memorized it to a piece of music by Shostakovich. And making this work was very important for me because it was the first time I had worked with a subject, in this case an actor, who brought to the table something that I could have never predetermined. Like, he had a sort of exceptional way of coming to the material or the idea and infusing it with something that I just could never have asked him to do. And sort of his capabilities, I like this idea of like a figure, particularly a black man, who's supposed to be a figure of transmission, who is almost unrepresentable. Like, he seems at times totally insane or completely skilled in doing something very specific. And so this was my first try. And this is an image of it on the High Line in New York City. And so a couple winters ago, it would be on at nighttime, and you could walk down the street in Chelsea and see it projected on this building. And I loved the idea of someone who wasn't even into contemporary art walking by and seeing something like this, and maybe what they would take from the work in the middle of the street in New York. This next piece is the second video that I ever made. It's called The Alphabet, and it's turned into a longer project that I return to every couple of years. We can just watch a couple minutes of it, and then I'll tell you about it.
A. B.
That's
C.
a A.
D.
And here's a B. And nobody care about no C. And ain't nobody interested in D. Right? E's got it all covered.
A,
We shift
B,
to the F.
A.
C,
Hang up with the G.
D,
That's it, F.
Move
E.
down to the H.
F.
F,
J.
18.
And here
I.
comes K. G. Walking
J,
into place along with that.
K,
You know what I mean?
L,
J.
M to
M,
the N.
K.
N,
O.
O,
J.
P,
M.
Q,
N.
Q.
R,
R.
O.
S,
Now
P.
S comes stepping
T,
up. Right?
U,
T.
R.
We ain't know.
V,
He didn't take no
W.
U.
S.
X,
T.
B.
Y,
U.
C.
V.
X had it covered. Wow.
V.
So this work I made with, found videos I found on YouTube. And they're all from the first couple of years of Sesame Street. And basically, Sesame Street was the first publicly funded television program, federally funded, that was researched to help educate children over the television screen. And they were trying to reach single-mother urban households. And basically, they came up with this model of having, in this case, black male celebrities just teach straight to the camera. And when I found these clips, they were so similar to what I had just made with the conductor, and I had this aha moment of this idea of like education and transmission. And these works have become a sort of series I come to every 3 years, where I'm calling them like self-portraits of my studio. Because unlike a lot of my friends who are painters or photographers, I don't generally work in a studio, which is so ironic because here I have the most insane studio I've ever seen. But my computer is my studio, and so all of my source material, all of my editing, all of my research, all comes from my computer. And so this is the first one that I made that has become part of a series. This is a still from the last show that I had in New York City at my gallery, Koenig and Clinton. And I like this show installation as an example because I've been noticing through the years my work is becoming more and more modular. And so I'll take like a channel from different series of works and put them together depending on the space that I'm installing in. And this installation in particular was one of my favorites. This is a wide-angle lens, so you can't really tell. But the 3 screens were hung in a triangle, so you would walk into the center of the 3 screens and kind of be in the center of the installation. And all 3 videos would be playing at the same time continuously, but the sound would jump from one video to the other. And so you had this feeling of being in the middle of a group of people, each doing an action. And the name of the installation was called The Borrowers. And so I wanted them to feel like a coven of witches or a band who were each doing an action that would like magically make something appear for you, or just make something happen that you could take outside of the gallery with you. And I'll start by showing you the oldest work that I had originally made for the Made in LA biennial in Los Angeles at the Hammer Museum. And it is called David. And this work was also inspired by this idea of a conductor. I had read about the findings of this neurologist called Ramachandran who works and teaches in Irvine. And he had basically helped his patients with phantom limbs to get rid of their phantom limb. And if you don't know what a phantom limb is, it's if you lose one of your arms or your legs, it still feels like the limb usually is there because your limbs are mapped out to parts of your brain. And so if you lose that part of your body, it's still, that part of your brain is allotted to your limb. And he figured maybe if you put a mirror where your missing arm is and looked at your existing arm in the mirror as its replacement, it would trigger that part of your brain. And the first time he tried the exercise, he asked the man with the missing arm to move his existing arm as if he was conducting the missing arm back into existence. When I read this, I had this sort of aha moment. The mirror image is exactly this idea of representation that I'm thinking about, that can be used as a tool to reconstitute something that's been lost, and it almost very literally is in the brain of one of these patients. And so for a couple of years, I was trying to find someone with a missing limb. And I met this man, David, on a street corner in Pasadena, and I just went to speak with him about it, and he immediately wanted to talk about it because he had lost his arm in the early 70s. And it had ruined the pain from the phantom limb had ruined his life, and the trauma of the event of how he had lost his arm. And so constantly for David feels like his arm is stuck in a block of ice, and that his hands are clenched and his nails are digging into his palm. And I invited him to my studio to try this exercise with the mirror, and he immediately felt movement, and this was the first time he'd felt movement in his phantom limb since the 70s. And so neither of us were expecting that. It was very intense. But then I asked him if he would allow me to film him doing the exercise while he told me the story of how he had lost his arm. And so that is this video. And originally it was a part of a larger installation that was in the show, but I singled out this channel of the installation for the borrowers. And we can watch this in its entirety.
It's a Saturday afternoon. Sun is shining. I live about 4 blocks from the co-op. It's on 87th and King Drive in Chatham, Chicago, Illinois. Right? Upper class neighborhood. Or middle class neighborhood, however you want to call it. My neighbors are policemen. In fact, I live 4 blocks from Mahalia Jackson. Anyway. I'm on the truck in the parking lot. It's a normal day, and the streets are crowded. And there's a red convertible Cadillac that pulls up on the side of the truck. I'm not really paying too much attention, but it's a Saturday, and it's like 12 noon, so I'm almost done, and I've been rushing through the day, and I turn around, and here's a kid with a sawed-off shotgun. And I've been robbed plenty of times before. It never bothered me. And now I look and I see the shotgun, and he's nervous, he's shaking. And now it occurs to me that I'm in trouble. Why? Because he has the shotgun and he's afraid of me. That's a bad situation. It never happened to me like that before. Okay, so I had about $800-900, and just before I'm getting ready to open my mouth and say, oh, it's a good thing I got some money, a lady walks up and she sees him with the shotgun pointed at me, and she's everything turned to a nightmare. The shotgun went off. My head started spinning. I knew I was getting ready to fall. And I knew if I didn't get back up, I was going to really be in trouble. He ran. In fact, And I told you it was a Saturday afternoon. The street was full of cars. He ran, he drove off. When I got up and looked, the whole street was empty. Not one car on King Drive or 87th Street. That was weird. So now I look down my left side and my whole side is blood red. And I can see my arm is just ripped into spaghetti, right? So I'm walking out the parking lot, which is on King Drive, to 87th Street, and once I get out the parking lot and turn the corner, I can walk back into the store because I need the cashier to call the ambulance. And as soon as I step in the store, she starts screaming. Before I can get her to call the ambulance or me or get me some, she just started screaming and ran from me. So I got some pencils and a rubber band, and I put it around my arm and stuck the pencils in it and twisted it up, right? And then I'm laying on the floor, and this policeman, one cop, no, not a cop, a detective, in an unmarked car, drove up on the sidewalk, ran up into the store, and he looked at me, he says, "You're not gonna make it." He picked me up, walked out the door with me in his the back door, and put me in an unmarked car and ran every light. Took me to Jackson Park Hospital. And now it's turning dark, like 2:30, 3 o'clock, and it's cold. In fact, I've almost, we say I am partially dead, and when they get me to the, I'm up to the hospital on the gurney, and they push me inside the emergency room. The nurse pulled the sheet back and looked at me and frowned and said, "Oh, no." And pushed the gurney back up against the wall. And I looked at it, I says, "Hey, I'm not dead yet."
So that's David's story, and so you can imagine coming into this space and maybe his story would be on. But this sort of theme of dealing with trauma and time going by and then kind of using representation to go back and deal with it has become a common theme in my work. This was the second channel in the installation. It's called Dinda, but it's from a large commission I had where they asked me to make 18 artworks in 9 different, or they asked me to make works in 9 different towns around the greater Los Angeles area, from like San Bernardino to Inglewood. And so I decided to make 2 portraits of people in each neighborhood. And this is not the way that I usually work. I find an idea and it takes me a while to like find the right subject to illustrate the idea. And so I was very nervous about this project. And the first person I found was this woman, Dinda, who had recently immigrated from Kenya. And I found out that she was teaching a class called Laughing Yoga at elderly home that she worked at. And so I asked her if she would go through her exercises that she does in class, and I would just film her doing these laughing exercises. And the way I would install the works at LACMA, they gave me the movie theater called the Bing Theater at LACMA once every couple of weeks. And so on a Sunday, I would install 2 works in the movie theater, which is an old famous theater in Los Angeles, and it's gigantic. It's one of the biggest movie theaters. And I would have the videos just playing on loop all day, so you could walk into the space whenever you wanted and see the work. And I like thinking about this idea of like a theater as an installation space and not just a movie theater. But the first loop that Dinda came on, there happened to be like 30 kids in the audience, and when her voice and her face came up on the screen, like booming with laughter into this giant space, there was this chorus of children laughing back at her. And this sort of back and forth of like reaction to the screen is exactly what I'm looking for in my installations. And so that kind of gave me the courage to go on with this piece that I made for LACMA. But I pulled Dinda's part of the work for this installation, The Borrowers, and we can just watch a little bit of her laughing. And so, I mean, the skip from hearing the trauma from David's story to all of a sudden hearing the audio of this woman laughing hysterically was very interesting to experience in this space. And so the last channel, the third channel, I made new for this space. And it's called Anthony Aquarius. And it is of a man named Anthony Aquarius. So he claims. And he, basically in Los Angeles, I live above Hollywood Boulevard, so anytime I go anywhere, I have to walk down or drive over where the Walk of the Stars are. And there are always people there dressed as like superheroes or famous people. You can take pictures with them and pay them money. And once I saw this man who looked like Jimi Hendrix and was playing with an electric guitar with his teeth and with his left hand, and he looked and sounded exactly like Jimi Hendrix. And at the same time, I had become completely obsessed with this movie that I knew was being made. It's so dark, hold on. About Nina Simone, who is my favorite singer ever. And it was a big controversy because Zoe Saldana had been cast as Nina Simone. And everyone was very upset about this decision, including Nina's daughter. And I had become obsessed with the idea of making a work with Zoe Saldana about becoming Nina Simone. And it took 2 years of really trying hard to get a hold of Zoe Saldana. And then one day I was at a party and she just walked up to me. And under a weird series of events, she ended up at dinner at my house. She was very pregnant, so kind. And the movie was about to come out and people were just outraged about it. And I just couldn't ask her to do this work with me. But it had been so on my mind, and I still think maybe one day I'll try to get it made. But it made me think about this guy, Anthony Aquarius, that I had seen on the street. And I found him again and asked him if he would maybe make a work with me. And it reminded me of this because I loved this song that Nina Simone made famous from the musical Hair called Ain't Got No. And in the song, she's singing about things she doesn't have, like material things, and then she sings about the things she does have, which are her body parts. Like, I got my liver, I got my smile, I got my life. And I find that song so strange now because she's not alive anymore, and so you have this sort of disembodied voice singing about her dead body, or body that doesn't exist anymore. And so I wanted Anthony to learn this song. And after getting to know him, he told me that he had dedicated his life since the age of 14 to becoming Jimi Hendrix. Like, he didn't naturally play with his left hand. And if you just talk to him when he's not performing, he still sounds like Jimi Hendrix. And so we can watch Anthony Aquarius.
Ain't got no father, ain't got no culture, ain't got no car, ain't no way. So it's a wonder, what do I got? So while I'm alive, what do I got? Yeah, that's a good question. Why am I even alive? What I do? I got my head, I got my head, I got my elbow, I got my fingers, I got my blood, I got my brain, I can see it. I got my freedom, freedom. The most important. And I'm gonna keep it. I got my life. And nobody's gonna get that away. Yeah, you know what? I got my life. And I'm gonna keep it.
So that's The Borrowers. That's Anthony Aquarius. This is a different installation. It's called Daggering. And this was, I've installed it at a couple different places, but this was for the Dallas Biennial that happened once. It didn't happen twice. But I was really happy to do it because they gave me this giant warehouse in Dallas. So I had the opportunity to do a really, really large-scale installation. And so Daggering is 2 screens and then a sound installation in the middle above your head when you're standing between the 2 screens. And basically what it is one video is me. I grew up as a ballet dancer and I quit. I trained very seriously and then I quit when I was maybe 17. And then I never danced again. But I decided to take a class about 10 years later and film it. And that is that channel of the video. And the other side is a club in Brooklyn. I had a friend who was getting a little famous because he was sort of the hype man, the face of this group called Major Lazer, which is still around. And he was bringing this dancing style called daggering. He's from Antigua. And he brought it to Queens, basically. And they would have these big like dance competitions and dance nights where everyone would do this style called daggering. And basically what daggering is, it's this hyper theatrical, like sexualized way of dancing. And so his name is Scarrett Boy. And the thing that he was really famous for is he would bring a ladder onto stage and climb up the ladder and jump onto a woman on the ground, like humping her, and that's daggering. And so I knew I wanted to do something with him, and I was going to New York, and he told me there was this night where it was basically centered around like everyone getting together and daggering. And it ended up being like this really amazing scene where when we got there, they were really happy to have cameras there. We weren't the only cameras there. And so all the light that's actually lighting everybody are other cameras around the room. And it started out where the women were all dancing alone together, and then the men showed up, and all the daggering started to happen, and then everyone started like doing solos, and there were like circles around people, and then everyone did choreographed dances together. So there's this real structure to the night. And so I had filmed these two things separately, and at the same time I was writing down stories of memories I had from and I was slowly realizing that every memory I had was just completely negative and horrific and traumatic. And like the way I was thinking about daggering was so similar to the way that I was thinking about like my past as the sort of like, I was sort of, not that I was forced into dancing, but it was sort of an identity that I never identified with. And the premise of daggering is that whoever's getting daggered is being like very humiliated. It's sort of this dance of humiliation. And so I put everything together, and I found a narrator to narrate the stories that I was writing. And so the two videos play, they're each about 20 minutes, and then every once in a while this booming voice will come on over your head and tell us one of these stories. And I'll just show you one of the stories, like a section from it.
The summer of her 13th year found her in the usual regimen, 6 hours a day, 6 days a week of training, conditioning her body for an unknown future of technique. This year included the noted esteem of an artist in residence from Paris. The summer before was attended by from the Kiev Ballet, one of which came up to her longingly expressing a newfound interest in the joys of the U.S., including her amazement at the American students' clear skin, made available by what must have been an abundance of beautiful soaps. She lamented that they had no such thing back in her homeland. This confession was followed a day later by a quick escape, allocating AWOL status for the visiting Russian girl. This year it was only the one ballet master from Paris, whose main purpose was to direct a version of Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. The culture of the student-teacher relationship in a ballet classroom is one reliant on critique. If the teachers spend a significant amount of time approaching one student with an inordinate amount of stress, nitpicking, and what seems to be an uncalled for wealth of small complaints, it is a sign of great potential for the student. One shines in the light of this attention. The new professor, Philippe, was constantly monitoring the girl. A primal awakening shook her body, directing her to longingly kiss her pillow every night with an image of Philippe's face smashed under hers. While Philippe sternly instructed her on a firmer attempt at squeezing her buttocks to help get around that extra spin in her pirouette, she melted, experiencing the first pangs of a true bodily desire for a man. This year was an auspicious time. It was the first summer. Peeling off her pink tights one summer afternoon, she found a few dots of blood. Confused on the correct steps for a ballerina to take on blood stoppage, considering that in no way would she entertain the idea of sticking anything up herself, she stuffed a thick pad between her and her tights, which poked out a bit and looked bulky in the tight clothing. Exactly a month after this hallowed event was yet another. Philippe was scheduled to conduct the beginning of pas de deux class. For the first time, she would experience lifts and turns aided by the hands of a strong man. Her options for partners were small, with her height being so close to 6 feet. After stretching and warming up at the bar, they all went into trying lifts, kicking their legs apart into splits mid-air at the peak of the boost. Philippe came to look at her, taking in a breath, on the verge of explaining a better way to make herself look and feel lighter in the air, catching himself and cocking his head to the side in an embarrassed, awkward instant. He looked at the ground and turned away. Doing another lift, she looked at herself in the mirror, legs apart, and saw a wretched trail of steely red down her left leg. Paralyzed with horror, she was too disturbed to run away, and instead continued with the exercise, repeatedly seeing the image of her spread legs in the mirror, along with the shameful red stain.
So this work for me represents the idea of sort of being pushed into like a character or a way of being that you don't identify with, and how that potentially can be very traumatic. So that's staggering. Quickly. This is an installation in Geneva called Death of a School, and you can see I also placed the video of David in it. But this work was maybe 6 channels of a video series that I made about the school that my mother used to teach in Tucson, where I'm from. Both of my parents are teachers in the public school system there. They were getting a lot of attention a couple of years ago because they had made it illegal to teach ethnic studies. And so they had banned books. And basically they were banning like Mexican history classes because they figured the government in Arizona and the school district figured that teaching Mexican history was too anti-American because it was so violent against the Mexicans, which is horrible because in my high school it was 60% kids of Mexican-American households. And so they were just denying the public their own histories. And around the same time, they decided to save money that they were going to just start shutting down schools. And the way that the neighborhoods are built in Tucson in the 50s, neighborhoods were built around these schools. And so they're community centers, they're not just schools. And so if their kids, they go there to eat, like they go there for childcare. And they're all just also architecturally very beautiful. And so I, of course, thought I should go down and film the school being shut down, and I also filmed the last day, a couple hours of, the last day and hours of students actually being in the classroom and in the building. And this installation was a really interesting example of showing something in Europe and then showing it in Tucson, because I also had a solo show at Tucson MoCA and showed this work there. And so everyone from the school district who my mom had worked with was there. The principal of this building was there. Some students were there. And just the translating the politics of what I was dealing with in the piece was very complicated in Geneva. And so this idea of sort of like a consciousness of where the work is showing has become a little bit more important in my practice, and how and in what context. And so most of this work, there are many screens of just these silent slow motion pans inside and outside of the building and a couple of other buildings that had been shut down. And I like this sort of eerie, large scale. I almost thought of it as like a forest inside of the installation where you could walk through these images. Let's see. You can see the teachers moving out of the building. Everything being packed up and boxed up. Let's see, I want to keep moving so I can show you the last piece. So this is the work that's related to what I'm trying to do here in Rome. After the LACMA commission, LA County commissioned me and a couple of other artists to make works about unincorporated areas around southern LA. And basically those are neighborhoods that are part of the county, but they're not part of the city. And so you'll be like near Inglewood and think you're in the city, and then someone on a horse will kind of go by. And I picked the neighborhood with the biggest schools. And so there's a school in Athens, the neighborhood that I ended up in, called Washington Prep, and that's where I ended up working. And basically, like they had a field deputy from Mark Ridley Thomas's office in LA County, the LA County supervisor, show me around Athens. And he drove me around the first day, like showing me the school and the churches and like the one grocery store, like it was no big deal. And then I became very close with the drama teacher at the school who really helped me with this project. And he basically informed me that a man a year before had been making a documentary in Athens and had been set up and murdered for basically going into the wrong areas. As the county had been completely irresponsible with me. But through meeting people in the neighborhood, I found out that this area is one of the most deadly neighborhoods on the West Coast. It's the hub of gang violence in Southern California. And so Washington Prep is kind of in the middle of it, and so it's very hard for the students to get home after school because they have to walk blocks around the direct route to get home because of certain gang territories. And with this idea that I was going to do a workshop in the school, which I did do, and I went there with an actress friend, a director friend, and a writer friend, and we workshopped with them about writing stories from your life and maybe the idea of being in front of the camera or behind the camera and what that could be like. But I also worked with this drama teacher that was doing a very similar project in his class where he has the students write stories and then they perform them on stage. But I started realizing that the stories I was hearing from these kids were so urgent and traumatic that I couldn't come into the neighborhood with an idea of what I was going to do. Like the project was just going to come at me. And this is exactly kind of the opposite of the way that I usually work. But I was feeling such an urgency from the teenagers that I was meeting about like wanting to be represented that I felt that I was just being called to make a certain kind of a work. And so it felt also like the right time to be making this sort of a thing because of what I was reading about in the newspapers and living in Los Angeles, like the art market is very sort of abstract painting driven. I kind of thought like the most radical thing I can do is make a documentary based artwork about like the segregation and trauma that's happening in the city that I live in that I hadn't known about before. So that's what I made. It's not completely finished because I'm not an editor and I just kind of put the clips together. But I wanted to make a film that I could screen in the neighborhood so that the kids that participated could have the experience of like watching themselves in a film in their neighborhood. And the actual screening of the film was very, very like special and intense. For example, let me see. This is Jalen. Kind of good still, Jalen. And she is transgendered and dresses like a boy at school because she feels that it's too unsafe to dress as herself. And so she allowed me to film her dressed as herself and telling this like horribly traumatic story of growing up this way in Athens. And the screening of the film, she came dressed as a woman, dressed as herself, and it was the first time she had like been in public, basically, around the people in her neighborhood that way. And for me, though I had worked with a lot of the people who were attending the screening, I didn't know how they were going to react to Jalen, and she really revealed some very sensitive things in the film. And so I was very nervous about what was going to happen. And so I sat next to her, and we had a sort of Q&A after the screening, and one of the adults turned to Jalen at the end and said, you are so brave, this is so brave. And I knew that was the first time in her life that any adult had said anything like that to her, besides maybe me or a couple of teachers. And so that was something new to me, like the certain experiences of the actual filming of the film, of the screening of the film, became like a kind of like social way of making art that I'd never experienced before. I had explained in my 5-minute talk, but this girl at the beginning, she wrote a story about just going to a party and there being clowns there. And then I did some research and found out who the clowns were, and you'll see in a minute that they aren't normal clowns. But that day, the whole neighborhood came out because this little girl's, her mother had been murdered 2 weeks before. And so the whole neighborhood just wanted to be there to get her to dance. Like, it was really as simple as that. And it was like filming to a purpose besides actually getting the image. And that experience is becoming more and more important for me. And so while I'm here in Rome, I'm trying to figure out something similar to do, trying to meet people that are helping to facilitate a similar kind of a project. It's very different because of the kind of access that I have in South LA, because of what I look like, because it's where I live, because of the way I can just talk with the kids there. It's different. But I'll show you the last 10 minutes of the film, the very end. And in it, you're going to see a girl named Evelyn telling a poem that she wrote. And another section in the film, she talks about things she's been going through recently, which I hadn't realized when I first met her, but she had been going in and out of court because her brother had been murdered. Both her parents were drug addicts, and she tells this incredibly funny story about her mom giving birth to her in a garage, which should not be funny, but the way she tells it is amazing, because she was drug addicted and she didn't want the state to take her away from her. And so her and her brother didn't start school until they were very, very old, so she didn't learn to read until she was much too old. And despite all of this, she became this incredible poet. And her brother was in college. He was in community college and supporting himself by working at this store called Target, where you have to wear a red shirt at work. And then he goes to visit a friend after work, and you can't wear red in the neighborhood, and he got shot outside of the house. And the day before I filmed Evelyn, the killers were sentenced. And you're allowed as a family member to say something to the killers before they're sentenced. And Evelyn read a poem because her mother couldn't get up, and so she wrote this incredible poem and read it in front of these two men. But this idea that I keep returning to of working with people, it's not just about trauma and re-experiencing trauma through the storytelling. It's also sort of expressing it through this sort of exceptionalism that all of the students had that I worked with, or all of my subjects, in ways that I could never predetermine. And so Evelyn, the way that it's edited now, she finishes the film with this poem, and then you'll see the clowns at the end.
And the middle child and the only girl, they just always came to me and leaned on my shoulder. The little ones came and laid on me, the big ones came and laid on me, my mom came and laid on me, and I just sat there like the rock of the family and rubbed everybody back. So I feel like I did what I had to do when my dad passed away. I feel like I did the right thing of being strong. And I feel like now everyone is getting better. Their grieving process is getting better, which I'm proud of. And I feel like I still have to be there, but just not as much. I don't have to rub on nobody's back anymore. Now I feel like it's a time where somebody could rub on mine.
They tell me my dreams are illegal in the ghetto. They say that culture and poetry don't exist in my head, that I am dumb, poor and unfed. I want to be a neurosurgeon, but instead you criticize me because I have color in my skin. And if that's true, I told you my dreams are hater-proof. See, I know you mad because I speak the truth. Be beat and I make grown men shiver when I speak. And my dreams, they are bigger than anything you can think. They are bigger than the lies you tell about my skin. They are bigger than the stereotypical box you try to place me in. You can put my people in chains, but you can never take my knowledge away. You can never shackle and chain my brain. They tell me my dreams are illegal in the ghetto. Try to make me a prisoner of defeat. But baby, you won't be able to touch me once you feel my heat. And you beat me, and you wonder why I'm still not dead. It's because I'm emotionally stronger than you said. And you curse me, and you tell me I can never be nothing, but I still bring life to you because that's what Jesus did. They tell me my dreams are illegal in the ghetto. They say that culture and poetry don't exist in my head, but we prove them wrong with every word said.
watch me nay. Now watch me whip. Watch me nay. Okay. Now watch me whip. Watch me nay. Now watch me. Hey. What's up?
the end of my talk. Questions? Yes. Oh, good. No, he showed up wearing that. It was pure serendipity. Yeah, that was his outfit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was really struck that you were as fascinated with imposters You know, one of the first things you said to us is that you're interested in representation and truth, but just about everybody was taking it to some degree in every piece. That there was the Jimi Hendrix, there was the dancer who's not quite in his or her identity, there was the strange dagger dance, which is sort of a violation, a simulation of one. There was the phantom limbs were not real. It almost seemed like every piece was fixated on a particular kind of representational problem of things that are experienced as real but aren't real. And I was reminded of something that Umberto Eco says, and I think this is very much the kind of in like a kind of postmodern semiotics as well. That you cannot tell the truth unless you already had life. And there was a lot of that coming through. And I wondered if you thought about what kind of representation you're interested in, what the relationship of these representations is to the truth that I think you're also angling at. What is truth and representation? Oh my God, that's a great question.
Well, let me tell you. Well, I mean, for me, like, I really believe in the power of representation as a tool that almost scientifically can affect reality. And that's why I was so interested in this idea of the mirror exercise, because it scientifically proved that this idea of representation or a mirror image changes the brain.
In that last scene, I was also struck by the parallelism between the sort of imagined limb making you feel good, and then the dancing, which is meant to also kind of like imagined happiness, or this performed happiness, or to make you feel happy when you're not happy as well.
Right. Well, yeah. I'm constantly thinking about representation as a tool to reconstitute something that's been lost usually. And then, I mean, the work has so much been about this for so long. Finally, this year, I kind of made the step where I was thinking maybe I can just use representation as a tool now instead of always sort of using it as an example of a tool. And so it just seems so obvious when I was in that neighborhood of what I should be doing or what like had to be done representationally that like I felt like I was using the camera as a tool in that way instead of commenting on it. And so I like the idea of kind of going back and forth. And also this installation, like naming it the borrowers or like even constructing it spatially as a sort of like sculpture that's supposed to somehow affect the viewer, right? Maybe make you aware of your body just because you're looking at the way that they're sort of treating their bodies or borrowing an idea of something to an end. That I think maybe when you're looking at examples of people doing those things, that maybe you can be more conscious of the things you're looking at and how you're using them. But yeah, this back and forth between reality and fiction is definitely always in my mind.
Building on that, first, thank you for sharing this. Was fascinating also to think about the threads that are connecting to unexpected places is interesting. But I was interested in your thoughts about the issues of representation, but to whom and what audience, either seeing the work or maybe you gestured towards this with the difference between the school project in Tucson versus in Geneva. But I wonder if when you're thinking about in the process of representing, already you have an audience in mind, or I mean, the impact of the last play you showed would have been totally different had you shown it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something I'm trying to figure out. Because I think that's just something while you show in different countries, you just... It is obvious to me, you show the work in the place that you made it, the impact will be stronger. But there is a difference between like calling myself an artist and calling myself a filmmaker. Like I specifically made the decision to be an artist and that these are artworks and they're meant to be in museums and in galleries. And so I'm trying to figure that out. Because I think that the work can function in different ways also. If you see these images of like an American school maybe being shut down, and you don't specifically know all of the politics behind that, it still can function. Maybe it's not as directed as it would be if it's shown in Arizona or in America. But slowly I'm kind of getting perspective on what that means and like how the work shifts and changes depending on its context. but I don't have an answer to it yet. Yes, Michael?
First of all, just thank you for sharing your work. It was really emotionally overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is just how raw you let it be. I feel like you really let the sort of way that you're recording in the situation, you let it be very raw. And I guess one thing I think about is, or wonder about, is your relationship as an artist, controlling the image. Then also it seems like you're leaving a lot of room for the participants in the situation to also kind of speak back. And so there's this sort of moment of uncomfortability. I felt moments of uncomfortability that intentionally obviously doing. Where like, why is this shot so long? Or, can we just move on from the story because it's too much? And there's a certain rawness that I think you really, like I really respond to. Jimi Hendrix, what's his name?
Anthony Aquarius.
Anthony Aquarius is kind of off, It's like, he's not quite Jimmy.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I love, and then the smoke behind him is so campy. But there's something also very loving about giving him the space to do that. So there's this sort of back and forth, like this sort of rawness. And anyways, I thought we keep talking to actually make a point. But,
No. Yeah, when I'm going to film, or in the middle of filming something, the one thing that I always keep in mind while I'm filming is that I never want my voice to be in anything. And I try not to make cuts within the image. And so, I mean, yeah, that's the big difference of watching something sitting down in a room like this and being in an installation. It's like you can come in and leave whenever you want, and the editing happens with your body. And so in a large installation with many channels, you can imagine people walk around the screens, and in that way, like I think about editing in space in that way. Like I love the way that Eisenstein talked about editing as there being like a third meaning between edits, when two images collide, and then there's like a new meaning in between that collision. And for me, the collision is like an audience member walking through space and like making the decision to like encounter one video and then the other at any point in the story or the storytelling, in conjunction with any screen that's around it, and how video can be sculptural in that way instead of like a film experience in a theater where you're sort of projecting yourself onto the screen and onto the characters. It's coming back at you, or you're being more aware of like your existence while looking at people telling stories like this. And I think like using a documentary as a sort of device, I'm always very conscious of that, and its role in like fiction or like the reality of the audience member coming in and making decisions in a space. But yeah, what you're saying about like leaving space for that is always on my mind. Like that's sort of the one thing I always try to predetermine when I'm making a work. But yeah.
We have time for one more.
Referred at some point kind of briefly to also not just the audience's responses and how that impacts the whole thing, but the people who you were filming. And I wondered if you could elaborate on what it meant to some of the people who you filmed to see themselves.
Well, that's hard for me to say, because I think there's, especially for the LACMA project, where the idea was to bring people from outlying communities into the museum, which isn't the coolest idea. Like, I wasn't totally on board with this whole thing, but it was interesting watching people seeing themselves in that context, in a giant movie theater on screen like that. But, I would never say that, like, I've made a huge impact in people's lives by filming them. Like, that's not really what it's about for me. Because like with the teenagers, I still keep in touch with them, and I could tell just having an adult listen to them was a big deal, but I could have been anybody. It changes from person to person. When I work with an actor, that's always interesting because of the kind of collaborative nature I have with my subjects. I think that's something actors are just looking for, and so they get really excited by that idea. But I'm like at the mercy of my subjects. Like it's pure generosity all the time, and it's yeah. I can't really say like what impact I have on them. It's more of like what they have on me, and maybe to like somebody watching them. I guess it's yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. I think if you have other questions, we can take Nicole upstairs for a drink before dinner, and let's give her another.
Thank you.
Thinking of it as activist work. Like I was actually thinking of it as you were really there in it, and in a way like it's a deliberate absence of yourself. Right? But I can, in like even the small editorial choices.
That's interesting.
I know it's not
to hear.
just documentary, right? I think I said this to you after like the 5-minute talk, but there's something about the beauty of your pieces that makes it. And like the kind of hyper-realism that makes it impossible for it to be mistaken for a documentary.
That's so interesting to hear. That's great to hear.
Anyway, I would talk about it for hours. But the work that I was thinking of, that I don't know if you know, is W.J.T. Mitchell's work on it.
What is it?
It's some of the most difficult reading I've ever done, but he's a professor at the University of Chicago who works on